In our politics lead, Republican Congressman-elect George Santos of New York is now admitting to lying about his background and falsifying key parts of his resume. But he's insisting he's not a criminal and says he will take his seat in the next Congress, despite growing calls for his resignation. But as CNN's Eva McKen reports, many questions remain about that history he's owning up to right now.
An admission.
Did I embellish my resume? Yes, I did.
And an apology.
And I'm sorry. And it shouldn't be done.
After a week of controversy, Congressman-elect George Santos fessing up to lying on the campaign trail about parts of his resume as he seeks to minimize and defend the extent of his tall tales on everything from his education and work history to his philanthropic pursuits and Jewish heritage.
I apologize if anybody feels hurt or betrayed. I will gain everybody's trust back by just delivering results for them and making sure they do not forget why they voted for me in the first place, which was to get stuff done.
Santos has boasted of working for investment banks, Citigroup, and Goldman Sachs. He now admits he did not. The congressman-elect claimed he received degrees from both NYU and Baruch College. He now says he did not. But he maintains he's not a criminal and still intends to serve in Congress.
I'm not resigning. I have to leave Congress, Guy. It's going to be by a pink slip by the voters November of 2024.
And then there are the questions surrounding his alleged Jewish heritage.
We're no stranger to persecution. My grandfather fleeing Ukraine in 1920s to Belgium, then fleeing Belgium to Brazil in 1940.
Those claims were contradicted by family trees compiled by genealogy websites, records on Jewish refugees, and interviews with multiple genealogists. Santos now saying he never claimed to be Jewish.
I always joked, I'm Catholic, but I'm also Jew-ish, as in ish. And I've made that joke because growing up, I grew up fully aware that my grandparents were Jewish.
But CNN learning that Santos described himself as a proud American Jew in a document he shared with prominent Jewish groups.
Shabbat Shalom to everybody.
Santos now drawing the ire of the Republican Jewish coalition, who says they were deceived. Santos will no longer be welcome at RJC events.
I'm not a fraud. I'm not a cartoon character. I'm not some mythical creature that was invented. I'm no Russian puppet.
And Phil, while we're not hearing from Republican leader Kevin McCarthy, at least two Republican congressmen-elect who will also represent Long Island have voiced concern, with Congressman-elect Nick LaLota calling for an investigation by the House Ethics Committee and, if necessary, law enforcement too, while Congressman-elect Anthony D'Esposito described Santos's fabrications as hurtful and imploring him to tell the truth. Phil?
Eva McKen, thanks so much. I want to discuss now. I'm not pausing for emphasis. I'm pausing because, the idea of him being a mythical creature is kind of what he created to some degree. Alex, I want to start with you. He admits to lying, but his defense and reasoning for not resigning is that he did not commit any crimes. Do you believe that is an argument that is sustainable over time?
Well, I mean, as a legal matter, as a procedural matter in the House, yeah, it probably is sustainable that if he didn't commit any crimes, then he's probably got a 2-year term ahead of him. Republicans are going to control the House of Representatives. We've seen nothing from leadership or from his colleagues so far to suggest that they wouldn't be willing to seat him or that they'd boot him out of Congress for being, yes, a fraud. But if this starts to become a legal investigation, there are legitimate questions about his personal finances, about his campaign finances. If this starts to look like a public integrity issue, then yeah, I think that could look substantially different. But Phil, I think the really important context for this is a tough district for Republicans to hold, that they took it this fall in a localized wave in Long Island where if they had nominated a cardboard cutout of a Republican, he probably would have won that seat. And boy, do they wish they had nominated that cardboard cutout now. Yeah,
he talked about a pink slip in 2024 would be the only way he leaves. He's kind of wandering his way right into that.
He's an utter fraud, Phil. The Republican caucus should treat him like a pariah. In the before times, they would have, but they won't now. But this really needs to be said. This isn't surprising. I mean, in a party led by Donald Trump, who in essence lies almost every time he opens his mouth, it's not surprising that Republican candidates and Republican elected officials, I mean, they've learned from him. They've learned from him.
Well, and I think that's, to some degree, that's the lesson to take away, right? Don't ever apologize, don't ever admit anything's wrong, and then just kind of keep pressing forward.
Yeah, this is the Trump effect. It's that you can do pretty much anything. And what Donald Trump came in is he started, as soon as he became president, he was doing it before he became president, but then when he became president, he started doing all these things that weren't against the law, but they were things that people didn't do, right? So it started to be this kind of thing, well, it's not illegal, and it's like, yeah, but it's not really ethical or okay or acceptable behavior. And it was just like, well, I'm just gonna keep doing it, and who's gonna hold me accountable? And so I don't know what to make of this guy, where he has lied. I mean, even he calls them embellishments. I mean, that's not what that word means, right? It's like embellishment is like dressing it up a little. These are just lies. They're just flat out lies. What kind of person just makes up all these things also that are very easily verifiable, right? So, I mean, he was going to get found out.
But the difference between what's happening here and Donald Trump is he acknowledged that these things were not true. He's just saying that he should still be allowed to take his seat in Congress and that he didn't do anything that was criminally wrong. But going back to the point that you were making about what a difficulty it might be for Republicans to win this seat again. That is a seat that had been held by Democrats for roughly 10 years before Republicans flipped it in the last election. So if a special election were to be held, there is a substantial reason to believe that Democrats would take that seat back. Now, that wouldn't change whether Republicans control the House of Representatives or not, but certainly if you're Kevin McCarthy and you're looking at the situation, you're already facing difficulty with your majority. It's not hard to see from that circumstance, from a political standpoint, why he hasn't spoken out.
Yeah, can I just say, though, I don't think he has said that he didn't do these things, because he hasn't admitted that they're lies. He's calling them embellishments. He says people embellish their resumes. And so he's portraying these things as embellishments, and that's not what they are.
Andy's fighting
He didn't
back.
exaggerate, like I was a really good student or something at this school.
He's pushing back like Trump taught them how to do. And again, remember the context. The former president is still lying about the 2020 election. Most of the party still believes that lie. This is just not surprising.
Can I ask you, what I'm struck by, look, a lot of this is kind of funny to some degree. More of it is completely absurd. The comments and clear lies about his heritage and his faith, I think, have a much longer range here, particularly inside that caucus. You have the RJC, obviously, coming out very strongly. I want to read the Republican chair of New York's Nassau County, which encompasses part of Santos's district, released a damning statement saying, quote, "I expected more than just a blanket apology. The damage that his lies have caused to many people, especially those who have been impacted by the Holocaust, are profound." Santos tried to explain this by joking about being, quote, Jew-ish. I'm sorry, like, it's just not, that's not funny.
No, it's not. I mean, candidly, and I say this as a Jewish person, it's a little bit funny, right? Just
Okay, I'll grant you that. But more broadly,
the fig leaf that he's giving himself here, I'm not Jewish, I'm Jew-ish. Like, that's, I mean, you can't write this stuff, right? Except apparently somebody did. And I think a lot of Republicans were sort of waiting. You know, he said last week, I'm going to sort of have more to say on this soon. And I think a lot of Republicans expected it to be more than like, you know what, you got me, I made it all up, right? That there would be some kind of sort of a tearing of the shirt to explain what on earth happened here. But the reason, look, Eva explained this in her report, the reason why you have these other Republicans on Long Island speaking out right now is that what Republicans accomplished there in this election is not sustainable in a world where they start to be seen as this party that trivializes these lies about Jewish heritage that are very, very close to home to a lot of people who live up and down that stretch of New York State. And if I were to point to one part of this story, you know, part of the reason why he could hang on here, right, is that there's nothing in here that is a sort of red card offense in the vein of Roy Moore or something like that, right? Just totally indefensible. How could you possibly let this person serve in public office yet? But if you're the Republican Party and you are trying to make even incremental gains with Jewish voters and voters who know Jewish voters in the suburbs around major cities like New York, boy, is this tough stuff to tolerate.
And there's a huge difference, as you were saying before, between talking about your resume and saying something like that. That is when it becomes a very serious problem for the Republican Party. Absolutely.
how much do you think, you know, we have not heard from Kevin McCarthy yet about this. It's not overly surprising. He's also dealing with a 4-seat majority and can't afford to lose people at this point in time. But to Alex's point, I think is a very good one. This is a majority that was made by New York, right, made by Republicans in the new maps that were able to win seats that they probably wouldn't be able to in a presidential year. How cognizant do they have to be of that fact in this?
It's a big deal. I don't think you'll hear from McCarthy until after the fight to become Speaker is over. But I agree with Alex. McCarthy ought to come out, and the Republicans ought to come out and support a Republican to run against him in 2 years.